Welcome back to another episode of the Pinpoint Investor Podcast with Faisal Morsi. I'm your host, Faisal Morsi, and as always, it's brought to you by Pinpoint Skip. Go check out our data menu at pinpointskip.com. We sell lists of potentially motivated seller leads. My guest today is Tom or Thomas?
You know what? I get called all kinds of things.
Okay, so Mr. O'Brien. uh, and him and I met through a first responder friend of mine, Aaron Foster, who related with Tom. And from what little I know about Tom, he's a great guy, former firefighter, correct?
Former police.
Okay. And I'll let him get into his story. So thanks for coming on today, Tom.
Yeah, man. Excited to be here, dude. Thanks.
All right, so give people an idea, like, what are you doing? How did you get to where you are?
All right. So what do I do? So I am a real estate investor. I specialize in creative finance, owner finance, subject to all those fun little niches. I have a background in conventional financing also. So I have a nice little collection of short-term rentals, long-term rentals, and owner finance wraps nationwide. So that's pretty much the crux of my business. I also run a mentorship called the First Responder Investor Network that specializes in teaching creative finance to first responders and the family members of first responders. So how did I get here? Well, I had a 15-year career with Philadelphia Police Department. I got swapped around from, very busy, active districts within the city limits and saw my fair share of, violence and decay and whatever you want to call it. So I did eventually get promoted to sergeant. So for maybe like the last 7 years or so, but the last couple of years started to get really challenging and I started to feel stuck. Like I started to feel like, man, is it even worth getting another promotion for making a couple extra bucks a year? And, then the riots happened in Philly and I got, it was like, I think about 5 or 6 straight weeks of mandatory 12-hour shifts, days off canceled. And I got hit in the head with a bottle of piss one in the beginning of the ride, so that was fun. But that was pretty much the moment that I was like, oh, dude, I got to find a way out of this. You know what I mean? So I kind of started doing some research, and I just wanted a fairly, as low risk as you can get way of making money, but I'm super active and I can't sit still, so I need to stay busy. So when I learned about the power behind real estate, that was like the end of it. So I just started eating up all the podcasts, and then I found a lot of really good ones. And I reached out to an investor down in Delaware, and I literally like attached myself to him. Like I saw that he made a post on Facebook, and he was like, I did 12 burrs in 12 months, and I was like, fucking guys in Delaware, I'm going down to follow this guy. So I just messaged him on Facebook. I was like, hey, can we talk? And he's like, sure. And I ended up having like a 2-hour long convo with the guy on the phone, and he was like super nice. And I was like, dude, can I like follow you around? He's like, sure. So I used to drive down on my days off because I was still working at the time and literally just go from house to house with him. He had like his own construction crew and doing all these things. And I'm like, dude, this is so wild. And like, I would like paint for him for free and like, ask him what he needed. I would make runs to Lowe's for him and different things like that. And that was because I recognized immediately like the amount of value that he was given to me. So I wanted to make sure that I gave as much as I could in return to him. He's still a good friend of mine today. So I ended up doing like, I bought a deal off a wholesaler. I did a burr on it, and it was like way more work than I thought it was ever going to be. And there was all kinds of hiccups, like contractor stole my tools, and like guy tried to rip me off on a deck. I ended up building it myself with a buddy of mine, Steve Hudson, great contractor in Philly. So there was all kinds of stuff that happened. And like, I enjoyed it, but I just thought I had a goal in mind. I was like, I want to get the heck out of the police department as fast as I can. So there's got to be a faster way for me to do this. That's when I started to learn about creative finance and taking over properties that were like turnkey, like subject to, and I ended up joining sub two, and that whole world is like holy drinking from a fire hose, and there's so many different niches to go down and stuff like that. So I ended up pulling a few really, really, really genuinely like key relationships out of that. And in mixture, like with the first responder financial freedom page, who Aaron and Tyler and Mike Webb run. And I heard Mike Webb's podcast, and that brought me to that page. And like I used to call Aaron all the time and ask him all the newbie questions, and he was always kind enough to answer. Like, so I thought what was so cool about that group was that those guys, they never charged anything. And like I know now, I get it now, what it's like how valuable time is, right? Especially when you're running your own business and you're busy. But these guys always took the time when they could to help me out and to answer my questions. And I kind of took that model, and I'm putting it as the best I can into the mentorship so that I can give everybody what they need. But yeah, so that's pretty much it. I mean, I ended up getting into the owner finance world and using a trust and all these really honestly like super high level type creative deals. Like I just met, I went down the rabbit hole, and like, it's like you meet one person and you meet another person through that person, and then I ended up meeting my mentor, and then I just stuck with him like glue. Like he's been super helpful, and like always taking the time to explain to me all the nuances of all these deals, and it just skyrocketed. Like I was doing direct to seller marketing initially, and I got more than a handful of deals that way. And then it got to a point where I was actually like, a lot of people will call me up and ask me, hey, Tom, what do you think about this deal creatively? And like, I would help them underwrite it. We would do Zoom together, and, I'd kind of break them down and show them literally everything that I knew about how to structure that deal. But it became apparent to me that this stuff was way more complex than most people were used to seeing. So what ended up happening was most of these guys would end up coming to me and saying, hey, I got a deal. Do you want to do it with me? Because they were aware that I could do it, and they weren't quite there yet. And it was just a cool relationship building thing. Like I had fun doing deals with other people and watching them kind of get it and then start doing their own thing. And that gave me like some level of fulfillment, I think. And also it was nice because I stopped marketing altogether, bro. Like the last like year, little over a year, like I haven't marketed at all. And like I've had so many deals just come to me either through referrals or those relationships that I actually took the time out to help other people, and we JV deals together. It's like, dude, I straight up tripled my police income. And I will tell you, like, I put my family time above everything else. So I'm probably on the lazier side when it comes to like, putting all the work in for investing. But it was just cool. I can imagine what would happen if I actually did, which I am transitioning back into the direct to seller stuff soon. But it's been a cool process. So I think the combination of all those things that happen kind of just led me, I guess, to where I'm at right now. So we'll see what happens next.
That's awesome. That was it was a lot to digest and break down. So this podcast, I like it to be like a mix of background stories, and then also mindset, and then tactical. Let's start with the tactical. Can you break down one of your deals for me?
Sure. So I'll break down the very first creative deal I did. And I had a hard time digesting that this was going to work. But I had a direct to seller lead through cold calling because I had VAs and was pulling lists and all that fun stuff. And I got in contact with a seller who had a rental property that was completely paid off. So after, and I should make a precursor, like I committed a crap ton of time to studying sales, right? So I was deeply embedded in the Sandler sales system framework, and I spent much time like learning and understanding that, which was very helpful. So I met George, and George was just like the nicest guy ever. So he had a property, but he had a tenant in there for like 10 years. And then when I talked to him, he still had the tenant in there. So I had a couple of really good convos with him. I'm never pushy, right? And one day, a few weeks later, I think I was at karate class with my kids, and George called me and he said, hey, Tom, You never believe it, but my tenant just called me and said he's moving out at the end of the month, and the first person I thought of was you. And he even made the distinction, like, Tom, I've gotten hundreds of phone calls about this property over the years, and you're the first person I thought of, which I thought was really cool. So what we ended up doing was he made this suggestion after I planted the seed and asked about, hey, are you open to some kind of creative deal, like some kind of owner financing transaction? So I left the ball in his court. He came back with terms. So he gave me a note on the property, right? Zero down, $180,000 at 5%, which was where the market was at that time. He even agreed to defer the first 2 months of payments for me, right? So this property, the ARV was about 340. Okay. Wow. So there was a lot of meat on the bone and like I could have done a couple different things with that, right? Totally could have flipped it, could have burned it, could have did a couple different things, but the property needed about 60 to 70 grand worth of work on a good day. So after my previous experience, I had already learned about owner finance wraps and things like that enough to understand the basics of it. But I ended up joining a different mentorship just to get those few missing pieces. And this is why I have to laugh when people like they're unable to understand that you're investing in your future. Like when you spend some money to learn stuff, like, dude, I only needed like 2 missing pieces and it was worth every dollar. Because I joined and I was instructed, look, you can sell this property as is. So I ended up following the marketing strategy to do that. And within a 60-day period, I closed on it with an end homestead buyer. So the end homestead buyer, gave me a 25 grand down payment. So now remember, 2 months of deferred payments, closing 60 days. I literally didn't spend any money on this property. I think I paid a couple $100 to get it cleaned out. I mean, it even had a fridge that was filled with food that hadn't been emptied in months.
Wow.
Right? It was gross. So he gave me a 25 grand down payment. I gave him a note at 250 grand at 9.5% over 30 years. So I made 25 grand up front without barely lifting a finger. My note on that is about $1,000 a month that I make. And I had built an equity at the time about 45 or 47 grand. Now, there you go. That's the first deal. So every month I get paid from John, the buyer, who it goes through the transaction coordination company, the servicing company, right? And they pay George, right? And then the servicing company pays me my $1,000 every month. And I don't have to take care of the property. I don't have to put aside anything for deferred maintenance or vacancy or anything like that. It's literally about as close to passive income as I've found.
And so the onus of payments is on you though. Like I do understand, like, you're still kind of like a de facto landlord, even though it's almost like a triple net lease, right? Where you have the tenant taking over, but if that guy stopped paying, it's on you to continue to pay George, right? That's your responsibility.
100%. So I think, and that came to fruition recently over the past couple months because I was riding on Easy Street for quite a long time. So anybody that's looking to get into this, like, yes, you do have to have reserves put aside because ultimately, if my buyer stops paying his monthly payment, we have a 1 month contingency payment put in place. But then if that gets used up, like that note, that's on me to perform. Now we can, because the way the trust is set up and the deed hasn't transferred, if the buyer ever stops paying and goes into default, he gets removed from the trust and then evicted like a tenant. And at that point, then you can choose to do what you want with the property again because you never gave up title.
Can the buyer sell the property?
The buyer can sell the property. So I'm just a big fan of, if you're buying this, we know that you're not getting a title right away, but you're free to do what you wish with it. I could put some kind of prepayment penalty on there, but I don't. I could put a balloon on it, but I don't. Like, I like the long-term cash flow. Now, granted, in a deal like that, like if you look at the leverage, right? So if he's at 9.5%, you can bet your butt that if he ever can qualify and refinance it, he's gonna, right? Because nobody wants to pay 9.5%. So, but if that happens, if he refis out of that, then I get my equity.
And that's right? The 47,000, correct?
Right. And it's going to be more than that now because now you have two notes. You have one at 5% and then one at 9.5%. And if you can imagine, based upon those two different amortization schedules over time, my equity increases. Now he gets the appreciation, right? Which he should. And there's a number of different ways that you can structure those things, even with equity shares and things like that, to give yourself some of that appreciation. But this is all stuff that I'm still learning along the way, right? But yeah,
And
that,
so
in a nutshell,
who
that's it.
handles so like the like figuring out how much like equity and all that? Like, is it the transaction yeah, the TC company that like handles all that, like figures out like who owes what?
Yeah, so you'll have a personal property note inside the trust, which is my equity, on top of the underlying mortgage, which is getting taken over, right? So that personal property note is serviced by the servicing company, so they have that information. So payoff statement, whatever that looks like at the time, if John ever decides, hey, I want to sell or want to refi, then he gets that information, and then he gives that to the lender.
All right.
Yeah.
You talked about like a trust. So like how's this all set up? Like I don't know anything about this.
Mm. It's a magical little transaction vehicle. So it's considered a legal transaction. It's not considered a sale of real estate. So upon the initial closing with the seller, all the seller is doing is placing their deed into the trust. And they're going to continue to maintain 10% equitable ownership in the trust. Now, this is a little different because George's property was paid off, right? So on subject to deals, this becomes more pertinent when the seller still has a mortgage in place. It's a little different with owner finance. So it's not like the lender's ever going to call the note due, right? If it's a bank, but the seller would maintain that 10% equitable ownership, right? And then they would invite my LLC in to share 90% equitable ownership in that trust and management status.
Why 10%? Is that like just like
You know what? It's really just a number. It's based on the Garn Saint Germain Act.
the
So
what?
the
Sorry.
Garn Garn Saint Germain Act, Depository Act. So way back in the 80s when this stuff started to become more popular because the interest rates were so outrageous is when the act got put into place. And it's because the lenders were like, yeah, we don't want our notes getting taken over by people we aren't qualifying, right? So the fact that the seller is maintaining a small percentage of equitable ownership in the trust still, it's an exception to the Garn St. Germain Act. So that's the proviso that states that the lender cannot legally call the note due.
Got it.
Yeah. So on the back end of that thing, now it's like if I want to just take over a property subject to, put it into the trust, and then use it as a rental, I can do that, or a short-term rental, right? You could do novation with the trust. It just depends on how you structure it. But again, like the powerful part there too is like, hey, I'm going to invite in a homestead buyer to share 45% with me. Okay, so the deed still stays in the trust, and then they get the opportunity to buy the home whenever they pay off those terms.
Got it. And
Yeah.
so if they had a note on the property, so like let's say they still have a mortgage on it. You still do the 10%. It means the banks can't call the mortgage due. And then the loan name is the name of the trust, correct?
So the deed, well, the if you looked up county records for any of the properties that I've used a trust for, you're going to see that the deed or the title is owned by 123 Main Street Trust.
Okay, and so that's the title, not the deed. So the deed is still George's, and then once it's paid off, then the deed becomes the buyer's. It's just the title itself is in the trust name.
No, the deed is also.
Oh wow, okay.
Yeah.
So how is the seller protected?
So the seller is protected throughout the language inside the trust. So basically, there's a trustee that's in charge of the trust, and they're like third party fiduciary. They're like the referee, right? So whatever we're agreeing to within the terms of the trust has to be adhered to. If it isn't, if I default, right? Because even though my buyer might default, right, it's my responsibility at that point still to maintain that agreement. So if I default, then the seller has an opportunity to dissolve the trust, take back take back the deed, okay? And they don't have to go through an entire foreclosure process. So they don't have to go out and hire an attorney.
And so do you have a new trust for every single property?
Yep.
Okay, and that's even if like it's a portfolio sale, correct?
Well, I mean, if you're putting a bunch of properties into a trust, it would be structured a little bit differently. Yeah.
And then even on like on the back end, so let's say for simple terms, it's two properties. When you go to sell, can you sell properties individually out of that, or do you have to sell them?
I haven't navigated doing like a portfolio deal yet at all, so I'll keep you posted. From what I understand, it can get pretty cumbersome if you're gonna, I mean, if a guy's got 20 or 30 different single family or multifamily units and you're doing 20 or that's a lot. It's a lot of paperwork.
Yeah. How much does each trust cost to set up? About.
About 2 grand.
Okay. And so
Yeah.
you're fronting that cost obviously as well, correct? And that's what
So
when
I
you
would I would front it on the A to B side. Now, if I'm holding that as a rental or whatever, then yeah, that's my cost. Now on the back side, when the buyer comes in, the homestead buyer, if that's the case, like on a wrap, then they pay that.
all right, and you mentioned homestead buyer. What does that mean?
So there's a massive market out there for folks who can't qualify for a traditional mortgage. So that's really who we're targeting. So you have, I mean, God, even my wife is a nurse practitioner, when she switched over to full-time 1099, that I mean, we had trouble refinancing one of our properties because they take the 2 years of average income and they're like, even though you just left your W-2, we can't use that anymore. So you have a mixture of people. You're going to have people who own their own businesses, or you're going to have people that maybe got a ding on their credit, like maybe they went through a divorce or whatever, but they have the money and the income to support purchasing a home, just the banks won't qualify them. So there's a whole different marketing channel to go down to find homestead buyers like that, and there's a lot of them out there.
Gotcha. And so how do you find that?
Honestly, Facebook Marketplace is the biggest resource. I use Avail.co. I use Facebook Marketplace. Some guys use Craigslist. I haven't dove down that tunnel yet at all, but statistically, like 9 out of 10 buyers are coming from Facebook Marketplace.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah,
Um, and so like how many do you have like set up like this? Like, you personally.
22.
Okay. And you mentioned short-term and long-term rentals. What does like Airbnb look like it, structuring it this way?
Mm, I got to tell you about that one. And this was so I will say that most subject to deals like the low hanging fruit are deals with like low to no equity because the advantageous part is taking over that super low interest rate. Even though it doesn't have a ton of equity, you're playing a long-term play, right? And you can often get into those deals with next to nothing, bro, like a couple grand, sometimes zero. But then you have a different type of transaction. Like I did one in Philly, it is in the Fairmount section of Philly, so it was already a functioning short-term rental, and this was through a referral. So I talked to Ruel, who's awesome. So she had about 150 grand of equity in the property. So she had the property listed for a while. The market wasn't cooperating. This is going back about 8 months ago, maybe. And she was just tired of dealing with the short-term rental. She had a management company in place, but she just wanted out. Like she was advancing in her pharmacy job and wanted nothing to do with the real estate anymore, but like the income, right? So I was able to structure a deal with her where I gave her 20 grand down, and then I gave her payments on her equity. Okay, so she gave me a note, and I gave her $800 a month over 15 years to pay her equity out. So her underlying PITI payment on her existing loan, which was at like 2.75%, was about, I think it was about $1,600. taxes and insurance included. So that $800 a month owner finance payment on top of it brought the total monthly due to about $2,400. The property I have it now, and I just replaced the short-term rental management. I have my nanny, who's a fucking rock star, running it, and I taught her how to do everything. So that's been grossing about 6 to 7K a month over the last couple months since we had it. Now she left all her furniture there, everything, already functioning, bro. Just stepped in, gave her 20 grand, and the property is in trust. So all those documents and the personal property unit and all that stuff are included in there. So she gets her $800 a month payment. She got her 20 grand. And as long as I continue to fulfill the terms of the agreement, then everything stays in place. So what I ended up doing was, because at the time, you know, we're all in different moments in our business. Like, I just was like, I don't really want to leave 20 grand in there, right? So I had a buddy of mine who came into a boatload of money after selling a business, and he's like, dude, I need some depreciation. And I'm like, let me brainstorm on this for a minute. And I know him and I like him, and I'm like, I don't want to bring him into a deal unless it's like a home run, right? So I thought about it, and I'm like, I had a conversation with my mentor. What we ended up doing was he gave me 40 grand, my investor buddy, and I brought him in to split equitable ownership within the trust with me. So now he gets to depreciate that property, okay?
So all right, let's break this down real quick. So let's say it's a $400,000 property. He invests $40,000. Does he get 10% ownership of it? Like, is that how it's broken down?
No, so I split 50-50, so 45 and 45 within the trust, equitable ownership with him. It's a $625,000 asset, okay? So he gets to depreciate that. He gives me the 40 grand. I write him into the trust, and there's no title company involved. This is a legal transaction, right? It costs him $700 to get inside the trust. He gives me 40 grand. So at the end of the day, I got paid, about 20 grand, right? To own half of a functioning $600,000 short-term rental.
Okay. And so does he get any of the cash flow?
Mm-hmm. Yep, we split it 50-50.
If you're making like 6 or 7,000, I mean,
I totally could have kept it, not invited him in, but at the time, I was a little bit over leveraged because I was using a lot of my own money to take down these wraps, and that's when the transition started. When I started using private money for the deals, because I think I had about 7 deals floating out there that I used my own funds from my HELOC for, and some of them weren't closing as fast as I thought, so I was like a little nervous. So that's when I'm like, I need a cash pop. Boom. I just invited him into that.
Smart. Okay.
He said, that's fine. Faisal's having a hard time understanding why anybody would do that.
No, and I get, it's a cash intensive business. So yeah, the cash infusions are necessary. And so have you brought him in on any other deals?
Not yet, but we're looking at a couple more right now. So he's interested. So there's a number of ways that you can structure them. Obviously, you do it all the time, right? So a lot of it depends on what the lender's goals are and what they want to. But I usually, when I do the private money deals on the wraps, so I have a number of guys that will want to do like a private money partnership. Well, they'll supply all the funds up front to close on it. And then, granted, now when we get the end homestead buyer to put their down payment down, I try to, of course, underwrite it appropriately. So there's a very high likelihood that private money partner is going to get all of his funds back or close to it, right? So the cash on cash return is ridiculous on those things. But and then they'll share a percentage of the note, so some of the income and the equity. And then you have other guys that really just want like a quick, more like gator lending type thing. Like, hey, get your money back in 90 days. You want to throw up 15 grand, I'll give you like a 12 to 15% cash on cash return on that or something, So there's a number of ways to do it.
Do you do cost seg studies on these properties?
I haven't done one yet, but I just had a conversation with my CPA about that. So I know guys that do them. So I wouldn't be opposed to doing it, just sacrificing a property per se. But we'll see what that looks like. I'll tell you what, we just finished. we just finished, we had an extension on our taxes, and that my wife's, like I mentioned, a nurse practitioner, she's 1099, so she ain't hurting. So between that income and I mean, I had lucked out on a few. So there was one Delaware property in particular. I think it cost us 20 something grand to get into it. And we had a unicorn buyer come along and give us $114,000 down payment on the house. So
Nice.
it was like I got fortunate a few times in some of these where I got these pretty massive cash pops. So I was a little concerned for tax time, but I had the conversation with my CPA. So some of these were written off as long-term rentals, some of them were written off as installment sales. And we actually ended up getting money back from taxes,
That's
which is
amazing.
bananas. And like I get why people pay good money for a good CPA,
Yeah,
dude.
seriously. Yeah, I was gonna say if you need a cost seg guy, reach out to me afterwards. I'll connect you with my guys.
Oh, I will. I definitely will. I appreciate that.
Okay, yeah. All right, and so now, like looking forward, are you going to continue to do these deals, or are you looking more to grow the first responder network and the coaching stuff?
You know what, man? I think time will tell. I mean, I'm a big fan of like understanding that. I think I heard Alex Hermosi made a quote one time. His number one trait in a successful entrepreneur was resourcefulness. So, I mean, I've had to pivot a million different times. I'm gonna do the best that I can and try to make all this stuff work out the best I can, and we'll see what happens. I don't know. I have a definitely like a big spot in my heart for the mentorship, but it is taking up a whole lot of additional time and resources right now. I do see myself continuing on the investor side, obviously. I don't know if I'm going to stick in single family forever though, bro. It is
Sounds like a lot.
it is cumbersome. Like I would like to get into, more large, mid to large size multi and self-storage and stuff like that and kind of expand my horizons a bit for sure.
Do you have property management companies in place for these properties?
So I have for my long-term rentals and short-term rentals, yes. So for the wraps, as long as everybody's paying, it's completely passive. So the problem comes is like what I kind of started a fire in a way because I've been doing these owner finance wrap deals in like multiple different states. So it's like Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Delaware, PA, Virginia, all
Wow.
all over the place. So they all have different, eviction laws, right? And that's one of the things I'm going through right now. I have a default payer buyer in Georgia and one in Jersey. And, I've got to experience the not so nice side of that part. So I think that it's made me look at choosing my markets a little bit more wisely. So I do like the southern markets better for this type of niche for various reasons. But I mean, these things fly off the shelf down there, first of all. And depending on what state you're in, they're a lot more lax than Jersey. I'll say that.
Yeah. And so, I mean, why go like all over the place with it? It sounds like a nightmare to manage.
It's surprisingly not. As far as I mean, I've never seen any of those properties in person. It's all done virtually. I mean, I can easily get an inspection report and boots on the ground down there, and then the home buyer gets put into place, and then everything's on them anyway. You know what I mean? So initially, again, it was like my main motivation was to replace my income. So I didn't have a problem picking these off. And the way the trust is structured, it's applicable in every state. So you may have to, go through some extra steps or different procedures to get the deed recorded or prepped, but that's about it. So I'm not dealing with a title company 90% of the time. I'm self-performing. So I'll pull title and make sure that it's clear. And if there's anything hairy on there, I will get a title company or closing attorney involved. But the majority of these deals I haven't used.
Interesting. And is it because these properties are predominantly paid off, or you're just trusting these people? Like, because a lot of times, like title companies, especially here in Maryland, that like, they'll find stuff that maybe you and I couldn't find.
Yeah, I mean, like I mentioned, if anything pops up in the title report to make me think twice about it, I will bring it, to a title company to double check. and probably use them to close. I had one come up in Philly. I actually sold the duplex on a wrap to a buddy of mine as an investor to give him enough room for cash flow and a little bit for me. But the title company came back with a clear title report because it was initially getting ready to close the title company. And when I ran my report, it came back with all kinds of liens and judgments on there. So I let him know. I said, we're not closing on this unless we get title insurance because I'm not putting you in that position. So we ended up closing with the title company just to get the title insurance on the property for him.
All right, two questions. Do you typically get title insurance for your properties?
Nope.
Okay. And then what are you using to search the title?
Pro Title USA.
Okay. And then what transaction coordination company are you using? Is it different per state or?
So we have everything in-house with the trust. So we have our own servicing company, we have our own transaction coordinator and trustee.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that something you want to grow as far as like the TC company?
I doubt it. I mean, I may have to implement my own TC to kind of work in conjunction because depending on the type of volume I want to start pushing and doing, I'm definitely going to need some help on that.
And then your trusts, are you just using one company for that or one, attorney for that, or is it vary by state?
Same. So one trustee, one trust set up every single time.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so it's one trustee. So I'm assuming like an LLC or something like that.
Well, the trustee in this case is my mentor, so Equity Holding Corp. So they handle the trustee side. So it's important to keep in mind. I think when these things are done improperly, you can put yourself in a precarious position real quick. So everything has to be aligned just in case one day this thing ever goes to court. So all the paperwork is tailored from A to Z to make sure that both the seller and the buyer are well aware of exactly what this transaction looks like. I'll even go as far as recording a Zoom with the seller when we're going over the A to B side and also with the buyer on the B to C side. So we go over in detail exactly what this transaction looks like, and that's all saved and compiled on my end. So God forbid anybody ever decides to go to court one day and claim that they didn't understand what this process was about, then we have that in place along with all the trust documents, all the specific notifications that they have to be made, even like something like on the paperwork that's printed, like you have 3 days to come back and cancel this, They need to understand exactly what they're doing. And I have to be transparent ethically and professionally, especially with the end buyers, for them to understand that too.
Yeah, absolutely. So what happens if the trustee like gets sued, for a transaction that you're not a part of? Like, are your properties at risk?
God, I hope not. It's something to think about. So, a lot of times there's different ways that I've heard of, and there's not a lot of investors that I've talked to that are well versed enough with using a trust to even have a conversation with. But there's a couple that I know of. And some of them will do it a little bit differently. Some of them will actually have the seller maintain 100% beneficial interest, and then they'll have them assign that interest, 100% interest to them. They'll use one of their own LLCs as the trustee, which removes anonymity altogether. If you can see who's holding the deed, you can retrace that, right? So there's a few different ways that different guys will do it. I can't say that my way is the best way. It's definitely the only way I know. It's worked. And there's 30 years of experience put behind it. So I have a lot of trust in that process.
Got it. Okay. As far as like your group and mentorship, is concerned, how do people, look into it, and do they have to be a first responder?
So I think that's an interesting question. I've kind of limited it right now to all first responders, and like who is a first responder, right? Like a lot of so we have doctors, nurses, military, police, fire, EMTs, prison guards, all within our group. We offer the opportunity for anybody who's, married to a first responder or related to a first responder to also join. So we'll kind of see how that plays out. Like there's one guy in our group, Corey, who had his wife jump in, and that's kind of what I want. So I think that the goal behind it is to push it out, have this available. It is cliquish, right? That culture. So it may change over time, it may evolve, but for right now, that's kind of what it looks like. How can they find us? That's a really good question. So I've been just kind of diving into the beginnings of marketing in regards to the mentorship. And I think the goal is to eventually start putting a lot more weight behind that. But for right now, you know, it's really been mostly referrals and word of mouth. So if you guys go to the links that I provided to Faisal, you'll be able to take a look at some of the deals that I've done on the landing page. Everything is run through school, which is a super awesome platform. So, we have a classroom section in there with all tutorial videos in reference to all the different steps in the process. And that's one of the hardest things that I've had to try to put together, because I was never given like a checklist or like an SOP process for any of this, because it's so like black market gray area, right? That nobody ever handed me anything. I've just kind of learned by going through the process with other people who've had more experience. So I did put together a pretty comprehensive SOP checklist in reference to how to do these deals from A to Z. But it's hard because every creative deal is different. You're going to have a different caveat at some point with any given deal that's going to look different than all the other ones, right? Because you're taking over terms, and sometimes there's a HELOC in place. Sometimes you pull a title and there's two open mortgages. Like there's all kinds of stuff that can come up, right? People have solar liens on the property. So every single home is going to have some different caveat where no SOP checklist process is going to cover everything. So there's going to be there's going to have to be some kind of guidance like throughout along the way. So but yeah, so we got about 35 members in the group right now, and this is strictly through referrals and word of mouth. I made a few different posts in some of the first responder friendly Facebook pages about it, and we've had some people join through there, but there hasn't really been any marketing put behind it, minus like a few recent Instagram clips that we put out. So
nice, that's awesome. All right, and so like aside from your group, like how do you recommend people like starting to learn about creative financing, and like, especially someone like myself who's never done a deal, maybe they're a little like, experienced with real estate, or maybe not at all.
So I think really the best advice I can give is you have to find someone that can help you understand how to identify what the beginning of a creative deal looks like. If you want to really skip the learning curve and crush it, then take that information, find what you think looks like a deal, and bring it to that person who taught you that to JV with them. Because I can't think of a more effective way to learn and understand the process. But you got to make sure that person is going to take you through the deal. Otherwise, you're going to come out completely empty-handed. And I think that's one of the hardest parts, right? Like I could tell you, hey, go join Sub 2 and spend 10 grand. But, at the end of the day, what you're looking for, in my opinion, when you're joining a group like that is the relationship. Those few key relationships that you can get where people are actually going to teach you this stuff. Or if you're going to JV with them, they're not just going to take the deal, write you out of it, right? So that happens. It's happened to me. I know people it has happened to. Like, hey, I'll throw you a $500 referral fee. Thanks, dude. What do you get out of that? Nothing, right? Like you have nothing out of that whatsoever. So that was the hard part. Like really targeting those key relationships.
On that note, are you open to JVing with people?
Absolutely.
Okay.
It's been my main business model for the most part, like over the past year, and it's worked out great. There's nothing more exciting than seeing a skeptical, nervous person come to you with a deal, doing it with them. Everybody wins, right? Like I usually split my deals like 60-40, which is like phenomenal compared to what you're going to get anywhere else. Most of these guys, they're going to take your deal and they're going to give you a referral fee, or they're going to give you a very small percentage, probably nothing to do with the note. I want to see what that person's like facial expression looks like when they start getting that income every month and knowing that, dude, I have X amount of dollars locked in an equity that's going to get paid out one day. And like, I want to see that ignite like the excitement into going in and finding more deals and maybe teaching other people. So
That's awesome. How do people get a hold of you?
You know, you can reach out to me on Facebook. I have an Instagram profile also. I didn't give that to you. But my my suggestion would be to I don't know. I can give Faisal my contact information. I guess I probably should have did that ahead of time. But email I'll give you now. It's Thomas at investin2.com, INVESTINTWO.com. And also obviously through the mentorship, you have the opportunity to book a discovery Zoom through the landing page. So it's school, SKOOL, .investin2.com. So check that website out. You'll see a deal breakdown. I think it was the first one that I walked you through. There's some testimonials in there of guys that are already in the group, and it's really it's steamrolling pretty nice, dude. It's kind of cool to see it unfold. So
That's awesome. All right, before I forget, I always ask real estate investors this question. So I feel like in real estate, we always see like the lowest of the low, like the bottom of the barrel when it comes to society and humanity. What's been your craziest real estate story?
oh God.
You probably have crazier cop stories, but let's do one of each.
The craziest one is probably one that I'm going through right now with a deal I did in Jersey. So I had a guy come and pay cash 18 grand to close on this property, and it turns out Monroe Township, New Jersey, they're absolute hammers. So they saw a for sale sign out front of the house, and they have a rule in that township that, and this is the first time I ran across this, they're like, hey, look, anytime you sell a property or rent a property, you have to go through our inspection checklist. And I said, great, all right. So as the way the trust is structured, on the back end, the buyer really looks more like a tenant buyer, right? So there's an occupancy agreement in place. So we kind of they had those two check boxes and that's it. So we had to fit in one of them, right? So we ended up fitting into the rental one. So they went to go do their inspection. I made the mistake of letting the buyer go to the inspection instead of me handling it, which was a stupid move. And this guy decided, despite buying the property as is, being provided with an inspection report and having complete understanding that there was an addition added to this house that was not permitted at one point, he asked, and the inspector even told me this, the inspector said, I never had a tenant ask me to go outside of the scope of my inspection to look at an item. And he went and looked at that item, and obviously he's not got to make note of that. So he made note and said, hey, look, you're going to have to get a licensed contractor in New Jersey to approve this. So in order to get there, what we come to find out is now blueprints have to get drawn up. You're talking about 9 to 10 grand worth of work, right? So this tenant buyer ignited that problem. Now he can't move into the property until the township checks this off as clear. So what's he doing? He's not paying. So he hasn't paid in months, and I've gone back and forth with him a few different times. He's agreed, and I've even wiped out some of his arrears in order to get him to get in there. And he's still not complying. So we're at a point now where I'm negative 4,500. My private money guy's negative 4,500, and we're at like a checkmate position right now. So maybe next time, maybe down the road, if we ever do a podcast, I can fill you in on what happens, because I have no idea. But this is definitely a direct result of me putting my head down and just charging forward, understanding, I think, that things are going to come up, right? So it doesn't scare me. It's just going to be another learning process, and it's going to increase, I think, my due diligence when I'm checking into doing a deal like this in any particular area, right? And what those county laws or township laws look like and stuff. So, but this guy dug his own grave. He's going to lose 18 grand. And again, we discussed this, like, at the end of the day, I'm the one responsible. So when I bought this home or closed on it, right, and had the seller put her deed in a trust, we had an agreement that I was going to catch up her arrears, which I did, and then make that payment on time and improve her credit. So I have an ethical responsibility now. So we'll see what happens. It's mind-boggling, bro. I've never seen a person. It's just like it's like the perfect storm. It's the wildest thing ever. Wildest thing ever.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to find out how this ends up. All right,
Yeah.
and since you were an ex-cop, what's your craziest cop story?
So I was in a couple shootings.
Wow.
You know, so that wasn't fun. But you know, I think I probably have too many to list. Craziest cop stories. I don't know. I don't know. I could pick any one of a million right now. Um, One time I think we had this guy on 22nd Street. We seen him all the time. He was a drunk. He was all the way up and down 22nd Street, all causing havoc. Kind of, you know, not really a violent guy, just always getting in trouble and well known to us. And we had him flag us down one time at the end of our tour. And he said, I think I got stabbed. And we're like, let's see where he got stabbed at. And he pulled his shirt collar down and he was pointing to this area and we couldn't see anything. If anything, it looked like a tiny little red dot, like somebody scratched him or something like that, right? And we're like, dude, you didn't get stabbed. You know what I mean? Get out of here. So anyway, come to find out, when we came back from our weekend, he got stabbed by an ice pick. So I felt pretty bad about that.
That's crazy.
So there's one of a million right there.
Yeah, all right. So from cop to real estate investor, you're gonna have a lot more stories to share. Yeah, I appreciate your time. Thank you so much. And again, it's brought to you by Pinpoint Skip. Check out our data menu at pinpointskip.com. And thanks again for your time, Tom.
Cool. Thank you, brother. Much
Yep,
appreciate it.
Yep. Have a good one.
All right, you too.